And welcome to our special coverage of the Iowa Republican caucuses, the first primary contest in the nation. In a few hours, the GOP will be one step closer to choosing a nominee to take on President Biden. Today, the candidates are making their closing pitches to caucus goers in the Hawkeye State, hitting the trail in the middle of a record cold snap. This is the capital, Des Moines, where it is 2 degrees below zero, so cold that even the traditional sky-high enthusiasm among Donald Trump supporters may not be enough insulation. Trump himself has expressed concern his margins could take a hit from the frigid temperatures. CNN's Eva McCann is on the scene in Des Moines. So what are the candidates saying in these final hours?
Well, Anderson, Nikki Haley, she began her day at the Drake Diner here in Des Moines, a popular spot, and she's basically telling Iowans to get out and caucus for her this evening. She says that she's not worried about the weather, that she's feeling a lot of momentum and excitement on the ground. She has really centered her campaign on this notion that she would be the strongest person to go up against President Biden in November. So principally about electability. Meanwhile, Governor DeSantis crisscrossing the state as well. Take a listen to what he had to say.
People are going to say there's only 2 possible nominees, Donald Trump or Governor DeSantis. We're the only ones that have strong support amongst bedrock Republican conservative voters. And like, to win a Republican nomination, you have got to be able to do that. I think Iowa will show that very clearly.
So you see Governor DeSantis there. He's really caught in a battle for second place with Nikki Haley as both of them really try to emerge from this contest this evening as the principal Trump alternative. Meanwhile, the big question is, will Iowans turn out despite this brutal winter weather? The Iowans I'm speaking to say yes, that they take their role in this process very seriously. They think it's a huge honor that Iowa goes first, and that they've had the privilege of vetting these candidates, and that despite this negative temperatures, below zero temperatures, they do plan to go out to their community centers, among their community, and participate in the caucus tonight. Anderson.
All right, Eva McCann, thanks very much. We'll check in with you throughout the day. That cold is where we go with John Berman at the Magic Wall. So what do you think this means for turnout, John?
Let me show you, Anderson, where the weather could have an impact in Iowa. Everywhere. The entire state. The deep yellow here is where there are wind chill warnings. The pale yellow, winter weather advisories. It is just everywhere, and they're forecasting temperatures really low, like -14. That's without the wind chill in Des Moines. Davenport, -16. So which candidates will this affect the most? You could make some different arguments here. You could say, well, it could impact Donald Trump. The latest polls have him way ahead. Maybe he has the most voters to spare. On the other hand, they may take his lead for granted and not show up. What about Ron DeSantis? In this same poll from the Des Moines Register, 62% of Ron DeSantis supporters say they will definitely attend the caucus. It's 56% for Donald Trump, 51% for Nikki Haley. The issue for Ron DeSantis, though they are committed, it's where they might be in the state. He's making a big play for evangelical voters. Everywhere you see on this map with the darker colors has the greatest percentage of evangelical voters. I'll circle these areas right here. What do they have all in common, these areas? Look at the populations. The places with the biggest circles have the greatest population, the smallest circles, the lowest population. A lot of small circles there for these evangelical areas where Ron DeSantis is trying to run up the score. That means fewer caucus places at these precincts, a longer distance to travel over icy roads. That could be a problem for Ron DeSantis, getting his people those long distances to the polls. Well, where do they have the most polling places? Let me circle the areas right here with the biggest populations. Let's figure out what they all have in common. I'm going to take out these filters right here. All right, and I want to show you the 2020 presidential election. Donald Trump won, Joe Biden won 6 counties, but they're largely in those major population centers with a lot of voters, which means a lot of precincts, which means you don't have to drive very far to get there. Who could that benefit? Maybe Nikki Haley. She's making a big play for independent and moderate voters in these urban and suburban areas, university towns like Ames, where Iowa State is, Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is. This is a place where moderates and independents have done well, including in 2016. Marco Rubio, if you look at the caucuses there, he finished a very close third here. It's tough to see the difference between his red and Donald Trump's red, but Marco Rubio actually won in these areas that I circled right there, where there are probably a lot of caucus sites, a lot of precincts you can show up to. Maybe that'll benefit Nikki Haley. We'll have to see, Anderson.
All right, John Berman, thanks very much. A lot hanging in the balance here with the team in New York. Joining us is Doug High. Let's start with you, Doug. Who has, in terms of the ground operation, who has the better ground game?
Without question, Donald Trump. And I think one of the more interesting things about this campaign, in the general, but also here in the primary, is that Donald Trump has a real professional organization, which he sure didn't have last time he was running in the primary and in the general. His result was impressive in 2016, given that, yes, he was a force of nature, but Iowa's all about organization. It's why Ted Cruz ultimately won.
Ted Cruz had a very good ground game.
Very smart and very good, deeply tied into county and precinct by precinct level. But Trump was a force of nature that nearly won it all.
I'm told that Ron DeSantis has a very good operation.
He has a very good operation, very seasoned professionals, and he's worked that state hard. He's gone to all 99 counties, a lot of them more than once, more than twice. But Trump doesn't have to work as hard as the other candidates. He gets more attention in whatever he does. He certainly is better known by Iowa voters as well. And so we're going to see, I think, Trump do very well in counties that Ted Cruz won last time, that Donald Trump might have come in second or even third place.
It's also sort of an indication of the way Trump is running in 2024, which is a little bit of the benefit of having been the president. He runs the Republican Party, full stop. At the same time, he's also running sort of a little bit like he did in 2016 as an outsider. So in 2016, as Doug pointed out, he did not have the organization. Now he does. And he's sort of running as an outsider. So that duality of his campaign is a feature we're going to, I think, continue to see as this unfolds.
The anti-establishment establishment.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
To me, I spend a bit of time in Iowa. I'm involved with the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library there. Herbert Hoover, the only president from Iowa. And I think this story of Iowa is actually a story of the GOP elites versus the GOP grassroots. Because what you have in Iowa is GOP elites, electeds, Kim Reynolds, the governor, Bob Vander Plaats, an elite evangelical leader in the state, former electeds who are no longer in office but used to run the state, all have decided that they're friends with Donald Trump, but they're going to support someone else.
Yeah,
and in most cases, that's someone else.
I interviewed him last night. He's supporting DeSantis.
Very clearly for DeSantis. I mean, it's almost like they got in a room and said, who's going to be our guy that isn't Trump? Right? Because they're all for DeSantis. It's like they made a strategic calculation to try to back somebody that wasn't different, that was different from Trump, that would turn a page for the Republican Party. And when you look at the polling and you look at the energy and you look at where Trump is, you see that it perhaps didn't translate. So are the elites able to influence the grassroots, or does the grassroots have its own inertial momentum despite the elites, which has, frankly, been the story of Donald Trump all along?
Vander Plaats last night told me that the ground game that Ron DeSantis has, the operation he has set up, is leap years ahead or light years ahead of what Ted Cruz had in 2016, which was, to your point, a very good operation.
Yeah, and look, this is really a test of those kind of endorsements. It's a test of the ground game thesis. I mean, DeSantis' team has blown through an unprecedented amount of money before a single vote's been cast. And the latest Des Moines Register poll shows that momentum's actually moving away from him. Nikki Haley's been catching more. But given the vaunted importance of a ground game in Iowa, this is really a test for Kim Reynolds, a very popular governor. Can she convert that endorsement to people on the ground? Can Bob Vander Plaats convert that endorsement to evangelicals getting out, especially in these conditions? I think, Donald Trump's thrown out the rule book on a lot of issues. I contest the idea that, or there's particular irony that Donald Trump isn't an elite. There's no objective definition of elite that doesn't include a guy.
Amongst the Iowa GOP, he doesn't run the state. He's not the governor.
No.
He wasn't. He's not the lieutenant governor.
To your point, the grass tops tried to come up with an alternative to Trump, and the grassroots, to a large extent, seem to really be bought in.
It's interesting with this argument that Vivek Ramaswamy has been making, and some even supporters of DeSantis have been making it for DeSantis, which is that a vote for them is actually, if you want Trump, if you like Trump, a vote for them is actually a vote for Trump, because they will protect Donald Trump in a way that Donald Trump cannot protect himself from the deep state.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And actually, I think that's why you saw Donald Trump going after Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right, yeah.
I mean, for a lot of people thought that if I could just be a MAGA mini-me, that'll be a safe place to be within the Republican Party. Nah, it's a one-way street, man. He's coming after you one day.
What are your expectations for tonight?
So I think turnout is probably going to be down overall. It'll be interesting to see. We've been talking a lot today about seniors and whether or not they will brave the cold, the dangerous conditions, particularly in rural areas, which opens up an opportunity for younger voters to have their voices heard. Sarah Seidner, and what's interesting there is they're talking about, the thing the young Republicans in Iowa are talking about is electability. That benefits Nikki Haley. So it'll be interesting. I'm looking at not just what the turnout is, but where it is and how. Does the evangelical vote split between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, or is Donald Trump he got 2/3 of the evangelical vote in 2016? Can he hold on to that? And do young voters turn out? Do seniors turn out? And where? So I think that's going to be the most interesting, not just because of what it tells us about Iowa, but what it tells us about where the electorate really is.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what John was talking about, population centers. And what was interesting to me, just yesterday I saw a quote from a caucus goer for Donald Trump who was asked about the weather. And Iowa can handle tough weather, even if this is really tough weather. She said, I would walk over glass for Donald Trump. Okay, that is a mindset that means that person is definitely going to caucus. But you do have harder issues if you're out in that northwestern corridor or anywhere outside of the population centers where you have far to drive, and also roads that aren't necessarily as well kept. It makes that interesting to see, can Donald Trump get to 50%? If he's at 50% +1, he can argue that this race is effectively over at that point.
Yeah, everybody stand by. Nikki Haley is brushing off new attacks from the former president. Haley says Americans want to talk about key issues and not whether somebody's MAGA or not, in her words. Meantime, Trump once again turns his legal troubles into campaign talking points during his final stops in Iowa. How is that resonating with caucus goers? We'll take a closer look during CNN's live special coverage. Stay with us. Any moment now, Nikki Haley should be appearing at a campaign event in Pella, Iowa, in one of her last appeals to voters ahead of the Republican caucuses. Earlier today, she took aim at Donald Trump. He spent the weekend accusing her of not being part of his MAGA movement. Here's how Haley responded.
This is not what Americans want to be talking about. They're wanting to know why economy's high. And why inflation's high, why everything's more expensive. They want to know why we aren't focused on getting our kids reading again. They want to know how we're allowing the lawlessness of the border that's out of control. That's what they want to talk about, not whether somebody's MAGA or not.
Iowa State Senator Chris Knoyer is here now. She's the Iowa co-chair for Nikki Haley's campaign. Thanks so much for being with us. How are you feeling about tonight?
I feel great. Nikki is certainly gaining momentum at the right time, peaking at the right time, and I think we're going to have a big surprise tonight at caucus.
The ground operation that the Haley campaign has is not as deep or as extensive as DeSantis or the former president's. I mean, how concerned are you tonight about people actually showing up?
Well, I've seen the team grow over the last 11 months. She has certainly put in the time and the effort, going all across the state, putting on the time, the town halls and talking with Iowans, listening, answering the tough questions. And I think that has paid off, and you see it in the polls. And I think you're going to see a lot of people show up at caucus tonight looking for that new generational type of leader that can serve 2 terms, that has the best chance of beating Joe Biden in November.
What do you think success looks like for Nikki Haley tonight? I mean, does she have to come in second?
I think a strong second will give her the momentum that she needs going into New Hampshire. She has a strong lead in New Hampshire. So I think that a strong showing here tonight in Iowa is going to take that momentum over in New Hampshire. And then, of course, her home state of South Carolina going into Super Tuesday. I think she will be very well positioned to go one-on-one with Donald Trump and show the American people why she is the best alternative without all the baggage and chaos to move this country forward in a positive way.
Marco Rubio just endorsed Trump over Haley in 2016. Haley was a strong supporter of Rubio. I'm wondering what you make of Rubio's decision there.
Well, I mean, everybody's entitled to endorse who they want to endorse. Obviously, I think Nikki is the most qualified. She is the candidate that beats Joe Biden by double digits in November. And we really, I think, as Republicans, need to keep our eye on the prize. If we want to take the White House back, which means if we want to take the country back and move forward into a positive future, we need to elect someone that doesn't have all the baggage and chaos, that can actually serve 2 terms as president.
The fact that Haley's support is in more urban areas with polls closer, caucus sites closer for people maybe don't need to travel quite so much as in some rural areas, how much do you think that may factor in tonight to benefit her?
I live in a rural area and my roads are plowed. The county crews and the state crews have done a great job clearing off the roads. So Iowans afraid of getting out in a little cold weather. So I think we're going to have a great turnout. The enthusiasm at the grassroots, at the local levels is high. The enthusiasm is high, and I think people are going to show up. In fact, at my little elementary school where I'm caucusing tonight, they're already setting up shuttles because they anticipate that the parking lot won't be big enough for all the people that are going to show up tonight.
Chris Cano, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Donald Trump not just going after his rivals, he's also taking aim at people at the center of his many legal troubles. We'll see how voters in the Hawkeye State feel about this type of messaging in the home stretch next. Former President Donald Trump once again making his myriad of legal troubles a key part of his campaign. This weekend during a campaign stop in Iowa, he bashed the judge overseeing the defamation trial brought forth by E. Jean Carroll. That civil case is set to begin tomorrow. Still, Trump's legal fights have loomed large over the GOP presidential primary race. CNN reporter Elena Trine is in Des Moines for us. So how is the former president using his court battles to his advantage?
Well, Anderson, Donald Trump is really putting his legal battles at the forefront of his campaign. I know from my conversations with Donald Trump's advisors that they really view his political strategy and his legal strategy as largely one and the same. And that's why you're seeing Donald Trump talk about his legal issues so much on the campaign trail. And I know, again, from my conversations with his team, that they really do think one of the best strategies on the trail for Donald Trump is to try and paint himself as a victim of political persecution. And that's exactly what the former president did during his rally in Iowa yesterday. He told supporters, quote, "These caucuses are your personal chance to score the ultimate victory over all of the liars, cheaters, and thugs." He continued to say, quote, "The Washington swamp has done everything in its power to take away your voice. But tomorrow is your time to turn on them and to say and speak your mind and vote." Now, Anderson, we should note that much of his incendiary rhetoric around his legal issues isn't necessarily based in fact, but it is something that his team believe is working well with his supporters. And I also just, a great example of this, I think, is what we saw last week when Donald Trump took himself off the trail, not once, but twice, in order to appear in court for two of his separate cases. And part of that strategy was really, it enabled him to suck a lot of the media oxygen out of the primary and keep it on himself. And I think it's really a great preview of what we can expect in the months to come when Donald Trump is going to be bouncing between the courtroom and the campaign trail. Anderson?
Elena Trine, thanks so much. Now let's go to CNN John Berman at the Magic Wall. John, let's remind people at home how Trump did in Iowa in 2016.
Well, he lost. He lost in the Republican caucuses. And what's so interesting, Anderson, is in a way he's appealing to different voters this time around. Let's remember that in 2016, Ted Cruz won the Republican caucuses, 26% of the vote, Donald Trump at 24.3%. And as I mentioned before, Ted Cruz really campaigned hard among evangelicals. And you can see that in these areas densely populated with evangelical voters, this is where Ted Cruz did the best and tried to run up the score. These are Cruz counties, Cruz counties, Cruz counties. That was 2016. I want to show you a couple of these counties that have some of the highest numbers of evangelicals. Look at this. In the northwest corner of Iowa here, let me just X out of that. The northwest corner of Iowa here, Lyon County, Ted Cruz was first in 2016, Marco Rubio second, Ben Carson third. Donald Trump wasn't even among the top three. One county to the south in Sioux County again. High number of evangelical voters, Cruz, Rubio, Ben Carson. Trump not in the top three in 2016. Now, as we're in 2024, in the latest Des Moines Register poll among evangelical voters, Donald Trump's at 51%. Ron DeSantis is at 22%. Donald Trump is just lapping the field. 8 years ago, wasn't even among the top three in these counties. To an extent, you think Donald Trump has the idea that he's pretty safe among these voters. Why do I say that? Well, where is he spending all of his money right now? We have one slide here. We can show ad spending over the closing weeks of the campaign. Donald Trump's campaign and his super PACs spent $4.5 million targeting Nikki Haley. $0 targeting Ron DeSantis. So not fighting for the evangelical vote. He thinks he has that in his pocket, probably, going after more moderate voters, the Nikki Haley contingent.
All right, John Berman, thanks very much. Follow. My panel is back with me. It is fascinating. We're talking to Elena Trine about his legal troubles. I mean, it's a brilliant move by him to embrace them and to campaign off them. And he knows the cameras are going to be these court. He's following the cameras and fundraising off this.
And then insisting on being in court, even when his presence is completely not required.
And claiming he has to be in court and that he's being taken off the campaign trail and fundraising over that.
And then it's completely disingenuous, as we would expect. But the other thing he does effectively is joke about it. I mean, it's troublesome. He's so damn funny, is what a liberal Democrat told me the other day. I mean, he says, I've been indicted more times than Al Capone, right? He has all these sort of one-offs and jokes that trivialize the justice system, trivialize the fact that there's a real process happening. And frankly, none of his opponents take on the narrative because they're afraid of the voters not going for him.
Well,
so it's an unchallenged narrative.
Well, also framing a vote at the caucus as this is your retribution, as opposed to vote for, an issue, build a wall, or, I'm going to overturn Obamacare, which he, obviously never did.
Look, in political, there's an old political slogan, hang a lantern on your problem. And that's what he's done, right? He's saying, look, I've been indicted. I'm having these court cases. They're coincide with the election. I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to play the victim. Victim and grievance is one thing that populist strongmen do. But obviously what it also does is it does make a mockery of the Republican Party's traditional claim to represent the party of law and order. The fact that there seems to be no speed bump with folks saying, maybe it's not a good idea for the nation or for our reputation to nominate someone who's been indicted 91 times and could very well be convicted before the election. And it trivializes the stakes for our democracy in I think, a dangerous way.
Yeah. Look, the grievance narrative is resonant with his core voters, and we know, frankly, that it's resonant with some of the evangelical voters who feel like they have been attacked. They see COVID as a government effort to shut them down. Mm-hmm. So he knows that it plays with people also who are afraid of change in this country. We saw this in 2016, right? If you're afraid, you have anxiety about racial and cultural and social changes, those are his folks. So he knows when he's sitting in court and says, I'm your retribution, I'm taking these hits for you, right? And I mean, yesterday he even said, hey, if you're sick and dying, go vote, then die, because that's how you'll be glad you did, right? Because that's part of that narrative.
But it's an effective message.
It is an effective message. I think we'll learn tonight and then in New Hampshire whether or not we've really had a primary process at all. And I think part of that really ties into Donald Trump's messaging around these indictments that he's had, and his opponents, and I'd put that in quotation marks to some extent, they're using that same language that Trump does. So when Donald Trump gets indicted, not only do Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis not go after Donald Trump, which they would for any other candidate for any other office, they use the same rhetoric. A weaponized system of justice, two-tiered system of justice, things like that. So if this is smooth skating for Donald Trump over the next 2 months, the DeSantis and Haley campaigns essentially have been a Zamboni to make sure that there was no crack in the ice for Donald Trump. They've mirrored his rhetoric precisely.
Although you could make the argument that it's wise, maybe not wise in order to distinguish themselves from the former president, but Chris Christie was calling out the former president, and clearly that was not a message that resonated.
Well, Christie had his own problems, obviously, and was never going to get there. But you could also argue a process argument. When Donald Trump was in front of a courthouse, and that's a campaign appearance as much as any other thing, when he said, I should be in Iowa and New Hampshire, that's an opportunity for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis to say, and he's not going to be in Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all these swing states. He's going to be distracted, and we need somebody laser focused on Joe Biden.
But here's something we haven't been talking about. As a woman of color running in the Republican primary, first of all, how amazing is it that that's actually not a new thing, that we have women running for president? But she's actually, I think, her way of going after Trump. The men have all been like, you got to hit him hard. That's having run against him in 2016. That does not work. Listen to what she was just saying in that interview just now. People don't want to worry about MAGA. She's trying to create a bridge for the people who might be a little bit soft, who might say, maybe we should have a plan B, maybe we should be for someone else. And the way she has gone about Trump, it's not personal attacks. She's talked about the chaos, but she's also talked about it's got to be about the future. It's got to be about you, the people, instead of attacking him directly. And she's made more substantive attacks on him. I actually believe that is going to show, and that is how women have to campaign. There's a whole body of research behind it. And I actually think that may be the right strategy.
I mean, you know, the only thing I add to that, look at him attacking her in the last few days, not tough. She's got the most muscular foreign policy positions and credentials in the entire field. Yeah. And that's defined as tough in any objective definition. But that's an attempt to undermine her. And I agree. I think the fact she is a historic candidate, but we don't talk about it a lot because she doesn't play identity politics, which I think is part of her appeal. Yeah. And just, you know, look, I think most people get the joke that Donald Trump doesn't really, he may say they're coming after me on the way to get to you, but it's always about him. Right? It's always about him. And I think Nikki Haley's trying to offer people an off-ramp to the future. And we'll see if the caucus goers want to take that or whether that ends up turning the trajectory of the entire race for the nation.
Now, everybody stand by with just hours until the caucuses. Candidates are touting their endorsements. Question is, do they matter when Iowa voters meet to talk about who should be the Republican presidential candidate? We'll discuss with the congressman from Iowa ahead. We've seen a number of last-minute high-profile endorsements for Donald Trump and Nikki Haley in the run-up to tonight's Iowa caucuses. Sunday on CNN, former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan threw his support behind Haley, saying while it's, quote, pretty clear Trump will win Iowa, he thinks Haley has all the momentum to make her a strong nominee in November. For his part, Trump picked up endorsements from two former presidential rivals as Florida Senator Marco Rubio and North Dakota's Governor Doug Burgum announced their support for the former president. Joining us now, Congressman Zach Nunn, who represents Iowa's 3rd District. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Iowa voters are going to be caucusing in a few hours. You have chosen to remain neutral at this stage. Why is that?
Well, Anderson, here in balmy Iowa, where it's almost 30 degrees below zero with the wind chill, I think we're going to get the most important endorsement possible in this caucus season, and that's going to come directly from the people of Iowa. Our job in Congress, this is my first term, has been to be a great ambassador in getting some of these candidates to spend time with Iowans. And here's why I think that's so important. It's at the church rectory, it's at the high school gymnasium tonight that neighbors are going to talk to neighbors, not on social media or fighting online. This is an opportunity to actually talk with each other and say, these are the candidates who have spent time, who have echoed my concerns, who want to see a better government, a secure border, and a better country. Let's make that championship tonight. I'm very excited that Iowa gets to be the starting line for what will become a great race to become the next commander-in-chief of the United States.
I don't know if this played a role in your choosing not to endorse one particular candidate. Your 2022 race was one of the closest elections in the country. You won by about 2,000 votes out of more than 300,000 votes cast. Your district is considered a toss-up for 2024. Do you worry, for instance, a Donald Trump on the ticket could drive more Democrats and independents to the polls?
Anderson, you're absolutely right. This is still the most competitively drawn district in the country right now, and I've got 750,000 bosses back home. They're Republicans, they're Democrats, they're independents. The best thing I can do is to be able to bring folks to Iowa to have that conversation. And we're seeing people across the political line here really get engaged with candidates who spend time here. Candidly, I wish the Democrats would come back to Iowa and spend some time talking to Iowans here, because this is really a ground-up opportunity for voices to be heard at that grassroots level versus a top-down approach is what we're probably going to see in South Carolina, where a candidate is designated. So, the endorsement process here is part of it. More importantly, tough races like ours mean that we've got to have a voice for what's important in America being represented in the White House, but also in Congress. And so I'm also very open ear here tonight as I go to my caucus to hear what Iowans want to see happen in Washington.
Trump endorsed you in 2022. Haley campaigned for you in that election. Let me just ask you about each candidate. Haley's been warning voters that a Trump presidency is going to bring more chaos, says the country won't survive it. Do you share some of those concerns or criticism?
I'm privileged to have, actually, I think everybody who's in this race has come out and supported me. I think that goes a lot to the fact that, as a freshman member of Congress, we've been very pragmatic about getting real solutions for Americans. Energy independence, the economy moving, and most importantly, as a military guy myself, somebody who's very focused on mission accomplishment. Let me tell you this, whoever walks away from Iowa tonight is going to start a great stride towards taking back the White House and doing things that are important for my voters, and that's border security, whatever political party you are, improving the economy, driving down inflation, and here in Iowa, very importantly, making sure that our farmers and our farm communities are taken care of. I'm proud to be a champion on that, and I know that the candidates who emerge tonight will be very successful in driving those policies forward in Washington in a way that we just haven't seen for the last 3 years.
Okay, you didn't answer the question, but that's okay. I get it. The former president, though, he did endorse you. He is known for retribution. Are you worried by not endorsing him at this stage, you can incur his wrath down the road?
Anderson, I'll be very clear on this. We are supporting Iowans to give them the opportunity to have a voice on this. You know, people who come out the day of and make endorsements, that's all well and good. The one that really matters is what happens starting at 7 o'clock tonight when Iowans sit down with Iowans and make the endorsements that are really going to drive the start of this race. I've been proud to be able to get support from candidates on all sides here. I've also got a number of Democrats who have supported me. The key thing is here that we have pragmatic leaders in Washington who are going to stop the system as normal that's been so corrupt and non-responsive to needs right here in Iowa. Anderson, I think that's what's really going to be the takeaway from tonight is who's answering those needs that are being asked for from people in the heart of the heartland right here in Iowa.
Let me ask you then,
who's going to make a difference in Washington, D.C.?
Right. The former president, in his closing argument, has said Nikki Haley is not, quote, strong enough to be president. Do you think she is?
I think that any of the candidates that are walking out of Iowa could walk into the White House day one and be a great leader. You just need to look, again, from what Nikki Haley did when she was UN ambassador that really drove a strong narrative here. That the U.S. was going to support our allies in Israel and here at home, what she's done at governor. The same can be said of, Governor DeSantis, as well as President Trump. These are strong leaders on the national stage who are ready to be president day one. We've had somebody else in the White House for 3 years still struggling to find their footing. And I think Iowans here are frustrated by that. And again, I'll say people on the independent level are ready for change.
Congressman Zach Nunn, appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time, Anderson. Thank you.
President Biden and Democrats are keeping a close eye on Iowa to see what will happen and how it could impact his reelection campaign. We're live from the White House next. Happening now, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is in Pella, Iowa. That's on your left side of your screen. And in minutes, Governor Ron DeSantis will be speaking to voters in Sergeant Bluff, both making their last-second pitches. We're following them on the ground, and we'll bring you any headlines. Meantime, the Biden campaign is closely watching the Iowa caucuses today, along with the rest of us. The communications director tells CNN they're gearing up to make the November election a fight about, quote, more freedom and more democracy in America. CNN's MJ Lee is at the White House for us. So what are people there saying about the caucuses?
Well, Anderson, tonight obviously kicks off the Republican primary contest. There are no votes being cast for any Democratic candidates, but tonight still has everything to do with President Joe Biden because it is the beginning of the process of determining who the president is going to face off against come November. And like so many people who have been paying attention to the 2024 cycle, most Biden campaign advisors and people in the Biden world believe for the most part that it is going to end up being Donald Trump that the president faces off against in November. I'm not saying that there aren't folks who can't foresee a scenario where something wacky or something unexpected happens, but for the most part, the preparations that are underway right now for the general election are about the president facing off once again against Donald Trump. But I will tell you that there is a bit of a sense of impatience in the Biden campaign right now for the Republican process to really move forward. They would like for the country and more voters to sort of start seeing this reality that they think is real, which is that Donald Trump is going to be on the ballot in November. You know, their internal campaign research shows that the majority of undecided voters at this moment in time still do not believe that it is going to be Trump. Advisors we've spoken to say that for the most part, this is because people are still pretty tuned out of the election, but they are very much antsy right now. They're very eager to draw that contrast between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. It is why we hear them talk so much about what the first 4 years of the Trump presidency look like and making so many warnings about what the second term could look like. And in the meantime, of course, they are making all the preparations that they feel like they need to have a strong fight in the general election. That, of course, includes fundraising. We're told by the campaign that in the fourth quarter of last year, the campaign raised some $97 million, and they had more than $100 million of cash on hand, $117 million to be precise. And those are resources that the campaign very much expects will eventually go towards battling it out against Donald Trump come November. Anderson.
MJ Lee, thanks very much. Appreciate it. This isn't just Caucus Day, of course. It's also Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The civil rights icon was born January 15th in 1929. Events are taking place across the country to honor his life and his legacy. Dr. King's birthday was made a federal holiday in 1983. The Memorial Foundation, the organization behind the construction of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial on the National Mall, is holding a wreath-laying ceremony. Meantime, Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, honored her father on social media, posting, "Thank you for lifting the power of love. Thank you for believing that we can defeat injustice without destroying each other. Thank you for your courage and compassionate action. I remember you today on your 95th birthday. I remember you always." Up next, much more of our special coverage as we count down to the Iowa caucuses.
Good afternoon. I'm Caitlin Collins in Washington alongside Anderson Cooper in New York, and this is our live coverage of the Iowa Republican caucuses, the first nominating contest of the 2024 race. And it is a historic contest already, well on its way to being the coldest Iowa caucuses on record. So the candidates are battling each other, and their supporters will battle the sub-zero temperatures when they convene in just a matter of hours from now. The outcome could set the tone for the Republican presidential race going forward. It could also answer some lingering questions that we have, including how strong Donald Trump's grip on the GOP base really is. Could Nikki Haley leapfrog Ron DeSantis as the strongest Trump alternative in this race? And will the Republican field shrink following Iowa caucuses tonight? Let's start in West Des Moines with CNN's Jessica Dean. Jessica, what are we seeing and hearing from the candidates as they are speaking to voters hours before they're set to convene tonight?
Well, Caitlin, they are giving their final pitch to voters, but what is interesting is in talking to people who are involved with these campaigns, the big X factor is what you just walked through, the weather. Nobody really knows for sure exactly how that's going to impact turnout tonight. And obviously, when you're caucusing, as we've talked about, you don't just go in and check a box anytime throughout the day. You have to arrive at your caucus site at a certain time, go into the meeting and participate. So it requires a tremendous amount of organization on the part of the campaigns and the voters to get them there. And so, as someone said to me earlier today, what does this exactly impact? Does the weather impact geography in terms of rural voters? Maybe the roads aren't as good. Does it impact age? Is it older voters who may be less inclined to get out in these types of temperatures? That's just what people don't know right now. We're going to have to wait and see. And obviously, depending on how that impacts the different kinds of voters that can get out, that could impact some of the results. We are looking at how strong will the former president be? He has had a commanding lead in the polls coming out of Iowa. Will he be able to really clinch that commanding lead tonight? What does the race for second place look like, especially for Governor Ron DeSantis, who has staked so much here in the state of Iowa to really launch him forward to the next stage of the primary, or somebody like former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who's had a lot of momentum as we are heading into the first voting. So let me let you listen to DeSantis and Haley. Here's what they were saying to their supporters.
There's only two possible nominees, Donald Trump or Governor DeSantis. We're the only ones that have strong support amongst bedrock Republican conservative voters. And like, to win a Republican nomination, you have got to be able to do that.
Does it concern you in a Republican contest that it's not sort of more of the Republicans and it's more of the Democrats and particularly the independents?
No, because it's exactly what I told the Republican Party they should do. To me, Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. That's nothing to be proud of. We should want to win the majority of Americans.
And so while the Haley campaign feels really good, and the candidate herself, they're telling Dana that she really likes that she's pulling all of these different types of voters across the spectrum, the DeSantis campaign, Caitlin, will make the argument that they have enthusiasm on their side, that their voters are less squishy when it comes to certainty that they're going to show up at the caucus sites tonight. So they feel good about that. Of course, we're just going to have to see who shows up and how they vote.
Yeah, it's a critical question here. And Jessica, you're near the site of the DeSantis watch party where they're going to see who does show up and who votes tonight. But we know his campaign is going to great lengths to get people to show up in caucus. They're even offering rides to caucus goers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They are offering rides to caucus goers all across the state. They're being told to reach out to their precinct captains, to the people that are affiliated with the campaign, that there are cars, buses, vans that will be in place to make sure they can safely get to the caucus sites. And Caitlin, this really gets at one more thing that the DeSantis campaign specifically is really looking to make a difference for them tonight, and that's their ground game and organization. We've talked about this in covering them for the last several months. The super PAC that's aligned with them, Never Back Down, has poured millions of dollars into the state of Iowa. They have knocked on over 900,000 doors. They have touch points with hundreds of thousands of people all across the state. Now, they're hoping that that's going to make a difference no matter what, but especially when you do have this weather to consider, when it may be a little bit harder or more challenging to get people to these caucus sites. But in talking with some people, again, they just don't know what's going to happen tonight. They think that's going to make a difference. They're hopeful it's going to make a difference, but we have to see how it all comes together, especially as the sun goes down here. Right now, you can get around the area of Des Moines, but I will tell you, the wind is what is a killer. And when it gets really dark, it is those conditions outside are absolutely punishing, Caitlin. And so we're just going to have to see how that plays into the makeup that we see at these caucus sites tonight.
Yeah, hoping everybody stays safe. Jessica Dean, thank you. Anderson?
Let's go to Alyssa Raffa at the Weather Center. So what are Iowans contending with tonight?
We've got temperatures, Anderson, that have been below zero since Saturday afternoon. Des Moines just hit 0 degrees right now, but that wind chill is still at 20 degrees below zero. You still have temperatures as cold as 8 degrees below zero up in Sheldon, with those wind chills as cold as 30 degrees below zero. We've got wind chill warnings in effect for most of the state because those frostbite times are so small. We could find hypothermia symptoms of confusion, difficulty speaking, stiff muscles in temperatures and wind chills this cold. This evening, as some of those caucuses are going on, we're looking at temperatures as much as 10 degrees below zero. Those wind chills as cold as 30 to 35 degrees below zero. Frostbite can happen in 20 minutes or less. And when you look at all the past caucuses, yes, Iowa is cold, but temperatures in the 30s and 40s are nothing compared to that 0 degree temperature that we have out there today for this year, 2024. The past coldest caucus was 16 degrees. That was back in 2004. And I want to mention that this cold snap is happening in the midst of their warmest winter on record. Iowa hasn't really had a cold snap so far this season. So this is really the first time that Iowans are really feeling cold this extreme. And I also want to mention that Des Moines has not been below zero since February of 2021. So this doesn't happen all that often. Anderson.
Right. Alyssa Raffa, thank you so much. We know where caucus goers may see some rough winter conditions. The question is, where do candidates really need folks to show up? John Berman is back at the Magic Wall to game this out for us. What are you looking at, John?
Let me show you 3 different counties, Anderson, really east, west, and center that tell the story of tonight. Let's start with Dubuque in the eastern part of this state. I'm pointing this up because Dubuque, it's always close. In the presidential race in 2020, Donald Trump won, but by just a few points. In 2016, in the presidential race, Donald Trump won, but by only 1 point. In the 2016 Republican caucuses, you can see it was Donald Trump who won there, but by less than a point. It's sort of this knife's edge county, or at least it has been. And tonight, as you watch this, see if Donald Trump is able to build up a substantial lead in this county that's always close. If he is, that'll tell a story maybe of where the night is going. Keeping the 2016 map up here, I'm going to go to the far western part of the state. I pointed this out before. This is Ted Cruz country, or was in 2016, an evangelical part of the state, Sioux County. It's a small county, only 1% of the state's population. Ted Cruz won this with 33% of the vote, but what's so interesting to me about this county is Donald Trump wasn't in the top 3 in this county with a heavy evangelical vote. Tonight, again, I would not expect that to happen. You will likely see Donald Trump's name somewhere in this mix. The question is he able to blow it out in this county where he didn't even show up last time? The biggest county in the state is Polk County, which is where the capital is of Des Moines. This is a county where in 2016, in the Republican caucuses, Marco Rubio won. 26% of the vote, Ted Cruz at 25%. This is a county that Joe Biden also won in the presidential election. More Democrats here. This is a county where Nikki Haley has to do very well. Independents and Democrats can vote tonight. Again, in the Des Moines Register poll, 70% of caucus goers identified as Republicans tonight, but Democrats and independents, which make up about 28%, if they register as Republicans, they can vote tonight. There are a lot of them in Polk County, Anderson, and if they show up and change their parties, they can make a difference.
All right, John Berman, thanks very much. Caitlin?
Thanks, Anderson. And Jackie Kucinich is here with us. Jackie, you've covered a lot of Iowa caucuses in our days. I mean, maybe none like today is with as cold as the weather that our friends are craving. We're safe inside. But I wonder what you make of what the turnout could be impacted by this, because, you know, the Trump campaign has said they believe a lot of first-time caucus goers are going to show up for him. But are they as inclined to show up when the weather's this treacherous outside?
Well, this is when enthusiasm really, really matters. And Trump has been, unlike in the last time he ran against Ted Cruz, he actually has an organization in Iowa, and it's pretty vast. I mean, our reporter Jess Bidgood met a woman who was organizing, met a caucus, a precinct captain, who was organizing rides for people to get to caucus. And I think you'll probably see the same thing with Ron DeSantis, who also has quite the organization there. Haley, of course, in the last Des Moines Register poll was polling above Ron DeSantis, but her organization on the ground she hasn't been there as long as the other two campaigns. So that will be an X factor here, because you have to really love a candidate to come out in this kind of conditions. I don't care what they say. This is different even for Iowa. It is cold. And Jessica said it. The wind is no joke.
Yeah. And Daniel, what do you make of the kind of expectation managing that we've seen from Trump's team in the sense of what this could look like, given, you know, Nikki Haley's team is putting out a video today of how many times he said that he's up by 60 points in Iowa?
I mean, with Trump, I also look at who he's attacking and when, and he's offered a little spray on everyone here, from Vivek to Haley. So what that indicates to me, at least, is that at this point he knows that there is some ground gaining among both DeSantis and Haley, and even Vivek, and he wants to quell that as quickly as possible. He wants to see as big a win in Iowa tonight to just put the perception that this primary is over, that these are all stragglers, and that there is no chance at all of any kind of real surge of anyone but him in this primary going forward.
Well, so what does that mean for Nikki Haley? I mean, she's obviously hoping to totally disrupt that.
Well, look, Nikki Haley obviously needs to come in second place at this point, or certainly wants to come in second place. She needs to catapult into New Hampshire, where she is gaining on Donald Trump, but she's not there yet. Most polling still shows her down at least 10 points, some showing her more. I know CNN's poll shows a little bit closer. But the fact is that she wants to have a good night. She wants a one-on-one race with Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis is going to have a lot of existential questions to answer tonight for his campaign if he doesn't come in second place. He's been out there saying that he needs to come in first for most of the campaign. He's now also staked his entire operation on this state. If it doesn't pan out and he doesn't come in second, I think even his biggest supporters are going to ask, what's the path forward for him?
Yeah, I mean, he does. Right now, his travel plans are to go to South Carolina tomorrow morning and then to New Hampshire for a CNN town hall with Wolf Blitzer tomorrow night. I mean, could tonight disrupt that?
Well, that's a lot of travel miles, right? By the way, happy John Berman at the Wall Day for everybody. You know, as a Florida resident on this panel, 14 months ago, everybody, in November of 22, and again, DeSantis ran against a candidate that wasn't that great in Florida. We saw what we thought would be the birth of the next wave of the GOP field, and how 14 months later, here we are, all the chips are in the basket for Ron DeSantis. As you were saying, if he does not finish in the top two here, this is going to be really, really scary stuff for the DeSantis camp. I don't even know if he makes any of those events. We're going to find out in the next 7 to 10 days what the DeSantis camp will look like, but a strong second place is a must. Anybody in the DeSantis camp that you talk to after the re-election and as he started the presidential run will tell you Iowa was always the focus. Don't let them lie to you. Iowa was always the focus. So today, all eyes are on Iowa for him. He has to finish in second place.
Well, Jackie, what do you make of how Ron DeSantis, what he's saying in recent days? Like, you heard him speaking with Dana Bash just earlier today about the end of this race. He's much more explicit in his criticisms of Donald Trump. He's much more media friendly than he was certainly at the beginning of this campaign, when he was kind of in that heir apparent to Donald Trump era.
He has also started this underdog pitch, but also he kind of emerged this thing that he was saying at the early part of the campaign, which is it's a two-man race between me and Donald Trump. And it is very clear, that has not a thing any longer. And I haven't heard him say it as recently as he said it to Dana. But listen, he's trying to say he took a very traditional route to becoming the nominee in Iowa. He courted evangelicals. He has a lot of Ted Cruz people on his team, or did. And the difference is, the X factor here is that Trump, evangelicals really like Trump, particularly in Iowa. They like Trump. And whether that model is going to be broken tonight, that's one thing that I'm going to watch, because I think it'll be really interesting.
And that could actually serve Ron DeSantis well tonight if temperatures are actually keeping people home. If turnout is down, his campaign has been targeting the folks who are showing up every 4 years to the caucus. They are going out there and they're talking to the same Republican activists. Not to mention, if you look at the Des Moines Register poll, his voters are not made up by as many seniors as Donald Trump and Nikki Haley supporters. That also may play into those who feel safe to go out in negative 20-degree wind chill factors tonight to go caucus.
I was going to say, Caitlin, think about in pro sports, anybody who spends this much money in that state, who gets the endorsements of the governor and the biggest evangelical leader in the state, right? If you don't get your return on investment and all that, it's very tough for the DeSantis campaign to look down the road as we get to New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina.
Yeah, we will be talking about that very soon. Actually, speaking of, because coming up we have some of the biggest Trump supporters, as we were mentioning, are evangelical Christians. A question right now is whether or not Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis can break through. We're going to speak to one of those very influential religious leaders we were just talking about, who is supporting Ron DeSantis in this race. Also, what do the Iowa caucuses historically tell us about the race for the White House overall? We'll break it down after a quick break.
Donald Trump has gained major support among a critical component of Iowa's Republican base, evangelical voters. They could be a key driver in tonight's outcome, and their votes could be an early sign of what's to come. Let's go back to CNN's John Berman. Tonight's going to test, John, whether any other Republican can break Trump's hold on evangelical voters. Where do the candidates stand right now when it comes to evangelical support?
Well, they are all fighting for it, Anderson. There's no question about that. And when we talk about evangelicals in Iowa, they make up just 12.4% of the vote, which doesn't seem like that much. But in Republican caucuses, they play an outsized role. There's just no question about it. In 2016, they made up roughly 65% of Republican caucus goers. And Ted Cruz, seen as the candidate of evangelicals, he won. In 2012, they made up 57% of the Republican caucus goers, and Rick Santorum, seen as the candidate of evangelical voters, he won. And if you go back to 2008, a very similar story. They made up 60% of Republican caucus goers, and Mike Huckabee was the winner. He was seen as the candidate of evangelical voters. I want to go back to 2016 because that tells more of the story about where we are right now. As we said, Ted Cruz, he won the caucuses back in 2016. If we look at where the evangelical voters are in this state, again, in the far northwest corner, the darker the color here, the more densely populated among evangelical voters. You can see these areas or where the evangelical voters are. And if I switch to the counties that Ted Cruz won, yellow is Ted Cruz. You can see he did very well in all of these counties. This was Cruz County. Tonight, Donald Trump wants to do well in all these counties and the same counties he did well in 2016 himself. In a way, he wants to double where he was, and there are signs that he's on the way of doing that because of the latest Des Moines Register poll, support among evangelicals. I drew an extra line there, but you can see Donald Trump is at 51% among support among evangelicals. Ron DeSantis running second at 22%. But this is a group that both of them very much want to control tonight, Anderson.
John Berman. John, thanks. Caitlin?
Speaking of Governor DeSantis, he has poured a lot of time and money into Iowa, but a big question that we'll be looking at tonight is whether or not he can shake the former president's hold on evangelical voters there. One of the state's most influential evangelical leaders joins me now. Bob Vander Plaats is the CEO of the Family Leader. He endorsed Governor DeSantis back in December. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us on such an exciting day in Iowa. Do you still believe that Governor DeSantis can win Iowa?
I really do, Caitlin. It's matter of fact, it's almost like a perfect storm for him, no pun intended. It's frigid wind chills out there tonight. There's snow, there's ice. I think it's going to be a turnout game. He's built an amazing organization. Ted Cruz was the best organization I've ever seen in 2016. And I'd say DeSantis' organization is light years ahead of where Cruz's organization is. So if he gets the turnout, I think he could do really, he'll beat expectations, but potentially he could win.
So you think the weather will actually, in turn, help Governor DeSantis and hurt someone like Donald Trump, who right now is the front runner in this race?
Well, there's two things. That remains to be seen. There's two things that are going to play into a turnout game. One's going to be organization, which is advantage clearly DeSantis. The other one will be enthusiasm. And what I've been seeing on the ground as I've traveled with the governor from campaign stop to campaign stop, there's no doubt he has the energy and the enthusiasm. Matter of fact, it matches a lot of what I saw with Huckabee, Santorum, and Cruz in the late days of their caucus victories.
Well, I wonder where you think evangelical voters are going into this, because the candidates that you just listed, those were ones who primarily won those voters over. But when you look at a Des Moines Register poll, the one that just came out over the weekend, it shows that Trump is leading among evangelical voters with 51% support compared to 22% support for Governor DeSantis, 12% for Nikki Haley. I mean, why do you think evangelicals, based on these numbers, are lining up behind Donald Trump?
Well, I think one is because Donald Trump now has a record. He had a record of accomplishment. He appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He did the Abraham Accords. He stood up for religious liberty. There's a lot of things that evangelicals would say, we're very appreciative of that. But Caitlin, where my pulse doesn't line up with the polls, that means every other person I visit with in my base would have to tell me they're voting for Donald Trump. And that's just not the case. They tell me they're appreciative, but in the next breath they tell me it's time to turn the page, get to the next generation leader that can lead on day one and for 2 terms, and then they talk about Governor Ron DeSantis. That's why I believe DeSantis could defy the polls tonight and not only come in a very strong second, but he might actually knock on the door of winning this thing.
You just cited Trump's record, but I wonder where you think Trump himself lies on these issues, because Governor DeSantis told me he doesn't think Trump is pro-life.
Well, there's no doubt that the Trump of 2016 and the Trump of 24, we say he's just really not the same guy. He got the life question at at a town hall with you, and he said he's willing to make a deal on it. He had the same question at a Fox News town hall just recently, and he said that's why we're getting beat was because of the life issue, and we need to win. That he said about Governor DeSantis and about Governor Reynolds, that by signing the heartbeat bill, that was an awful, awful thing. For us pro-lifers, that says now he's now pro-choice, not pro-life. On the gender issue, when Megyn Kelly asked him, can a man become a woman? He couldn't answer that question. Those are issues that we have concerns with today. So I can see why evangelicals are appreciative of what he did in his term as president, but now they really need to look clear-eyed as they go forward about who can win at 24 and then who can lead on our issues.
Yeah, that moment you brought up, you know, there are two town halls. The town hall with me, Trump would not say how many weeks he would support on an abortion bill. In the other town hall with Fox last week, when he was asked, he basically made it sound like, or he acknowledged the fact that the abortion policies that Republicans have pursued are hurting them at the polls, and was saying you have to win votes. Do you think it's clear that Donald Trump is just politics driven on this, not policy or principle?
Well, I think it's definitely where he's at, because if you also recall in the midterm elections of 22, he threw the pro-life community under the bus and blamed us for not having the red wave or the red tsunami that we were supposed to have. But I'd remind everybody, those who were authentically pro-life, a Governor Ron DeSantis, a Governor Kim Reynolds, not only did they win in 2022, but they experienced the red wave in Florida and in Iowa that was predicted all across the country. I think on the pro-life issue, on the life issue, people want to have authenticity. They don't want to have nuance. They don't want to have let's make a deal. They want to know where are you at on that issue. And I believe Governor DeSantis has been exceptionally clear. He wants to be a champion for the culture of the sanctity of human life.
If Donald Trump wins the Iowa caucuses tonight, could you support him despite everything that you just laid out of what he said about your community?
Well, I think whoever wins the nomination, and whether that be Governor DeSantis or former President Donald Trump, they need to earn everybody's votes, especially those people that were not with them in the primary process. So I would say right now, Caitlin, let's stay focused on the Iowa caucuses. Let's stay focused on the primary that's ahead of us. And then once we get to that point, We got to make sure that those candidates are willing to earn the votes and supports of the other camps. That will make them a better candidate going forward.
Bob Vanderplatz, as always, perfect to hear from you, but great to hear from you on a day like today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Caitlin. God bless.
And up next, a plea from Donald Trump to even his supporters who may not be well to come out to tonight's caucuses. Ahead, much more on the race for the nomination and the freezing weather that is bad enough to make even the toughest Iowan rethink going out.
Donald Trump is putting the pressure on his Iowa supporters to show up tonight as a brutal sub-zero Arctic blast bears down. The caucuses start at 7 p.m. Central Time. The former president directed caucus goers to arrive no later than 6:30 through sickness or maybe even worse.
So if you want to save America from crooked Joe Biden, you must go caucus tomorrow. It's really the first step. It's really the first step. But you can't sit home. If you're sick as a dog, you say, darling, I got to make it. Even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it, remember? If you're sick, if you're just so sick you can't, darling, I don't think, get up. Get up. You get up, you're voting. Yes, darling, because ultimately we know who calls the shots, right?
Was the former president in Iowa yesterday. My team here in New York, John Avalon, Margaret Hoover, Karen Finney, Doug High. Turnout is the question. Who has the better ground game? Who's going to get their folks to the polls?
Yeah. There's enthusiasm behind Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I think it's probably good for him and his team that he got a little nervous. He had to cancel a couple flights and then realized he couldn't get there. He realized the polls were tightening. He started swiping at Vivek Ramaswamy. Rhymes with fake. There's a little editorialization on the Republican side here. The enthusiasm is behind Donald Trump when you look at his numbers. But, I'm still part of the Republican Party that believes the party could be regenerated by a fresh face who represents a new generation who's historic. And that's, I really hope that Nikki Haley overperforms expectations and really brings back a robust two-party system to this country.
What's so striking to me, it is obviously about turnout, but we're talking about such a small percentage of the Iowa population having a potentially determinative impact on the election, on the nomination, really as the first caucus contest. So the highest total, John Berman told us, 187,000 folks participating in the caucus. 1.6 million participate in the general election. Evangelicals make up 12% of the population of Iowa, but they make up 65% of the caucus. So the reason this matters is, are we having a representative election? Nikki Haley really struck me just in the interview a second ago talking about, wouldn't it be good to have a Republican who could win the majority of votes?
Wouldn't it be good to have a Republican Party that had set up a system that represented the rest of Republicans across the country that could win the nomination?
So the inside baseball on that one is that the RNC rigged the rules to be sort of winner take all rather than proportional. But you rarely hear Republicans in this era talking about the importance of winning a majority of votes in a general election. Instead, you actually hear the opposite. Speaker Mike Johnson, Senator Mike Lee talking about, we don't want to necessarily engage in majoritarian democracy. So that's actually a very different message that we're hearing, and it's notable she's making this part of a closing argument. Not just electability, but we need someone who can build the biggest tent, which frankly would be good for democracy, to having candidates, both parties campaign for a majority of votes.
But again, this is part of why, the delegate count matters, the rules matter, the fact that Donald Trump controls the Republican Party and was able to get those rule changes so that it is winner take all, so that as much as how tonight goes and what the closing numbers are really interesting and important. At the end of the day, it's about the delegate count. And I'll keep saying this, Donald Trump wants to have, accrue enough delegates that it is impossible to overtake him by Super Tuesday when who knows what could happen in his legal cases.
So, by South Carolina, are there going to be the same three candidates vying in South Carolina?
Yeah, Iowa's not necessarily about who wins it. Obviously, Donald Trump gets attention for everything and should be a big winner tonight. We'll see how big. But it's about who emerges. And that question comes to, and I think it was what John was speaking to about evangelicals. Does Ron DeSantis emerge or not? And if he doesn't, then effectively this is a two-person race. Asa Hutchinson could stay in, but who cares really? So if it's a two-person race, then it does go to South Carolina, where Nikki Haley could make things interesting, but she also could lose her home state. And at that point, I think we have two ways that this race goes. It's effectively over at that point for Donald Trump, and then there's the delegate math that Karen talks about, where there's the official part of it being over. And this could be a very short process here, is I think what we're seeing. Part of that is because we do start with winner take all. It's not dramatically different from what Republicans have done in the past. This is how the RNC did things in 2020 and certainly in 2016 by and large as well.
You know, John, to your point, talking a little bit about Iowa and the percentage of people who actually are participating, this is a big part of why the DNC changed our process, because we felt that, and we started it actually when I was at the DNC after the 2004 election, and obviously they completed the process just last year to move South Carolina up so that we could have a more representative. I know everybody likes to talk about Joe Biden wanting to reward black voters. That's true, but also there have been strong feelings in our party for a long time that we needed to have an earlier contest that actually represented the diversity of our party and the diversity of our country, which is why you saw South Carolina and Nevada moving up.
Any party that wasn't on a suicide watch, that really wanted to win, that wanted to expand the base, that wanted to win the majority of American votes. And I don't just mean like New York and California. I mean the old-fashioned way. You win the majority of people in the majority of states and the Electoral College would recognize the thing that Nikki Haley said, which is that the Republican Party has won 1 out of the last 6 popular votes of presidential elections, and try to expand the base. By the way, like, the autopsy report in 2012 from the Republican Party said the same thing. I mean, the sort of mainstream Republicans understand this, but mainstream Republicans aren't your average primary participant in Iowa, in South Carolina, or in any of the primary states that are going to be in the Sunshine Belt coming up. So you've got New Hampshire.
Where are the mainstream Republicans hiding?
Well, they don't participate. Right, like, they don't present on CNN. I don't. You know, there's some on, a couple other cable networks, but they actually just don't participate always enthusiastically in the primary process. They show up every 4 years, not every cycle, and that's just their lower propensity voters. It happens on the Democratic side too. But the ones that can be competitive in a general election aren't activated right now.
Well, they haven't had the courage of their convictions. A lot of elected leaders of the Republican Party who know better sort of fall in line, right? It's that careerism and cowardice combination. I think the main issue is that representative elections have representative results, and democracies, we know from history, are undermined with polarization and hyperpartisanship. It's easier to hijack a polarized, relatively small system. And so you want both parties competing for the majority of Americans, but that requires centrist Republicans standing up and speaking out and showing their real muscle, and they have not been.
We just got some new sound from Nikki Haley responding to something that DeSantis had said about her not being conservative enough. Let's listen.
Earlier today, Governor DeSantis said that you can't beat Trump because you don't have the support of core conservatives. So I'm just wondering how you respond to that.
I'm not going to respond to that. I mean, I was a Tea Party governor. I was a strong UN ambassador. We have had, I don't even know how many town halls. We've got a lot of support. The momentum's going up. And I don't know how he can say that. Our polls are going up. His are going down. That's just a fact. We're going to continue because people want a new generational leader. They don't want the chaos. They don't want the drama.
Interesting. She didn't really answer the question. I mean, there is an argument she could have made about it.
Well, but I think she makes an important. She was elected in the Tea Party wave. She was a Trump appointee at the UN. It shows how skewed, frankly, our frame of center is. She's very conservative by any measure. She just hasn't, kissed the ring like so many other Republicans have.
Well, she has kissed the ring. I mean, she served in the Trump administration, and she was able to, frankly, she's just the one with the most political dexterity because she was able to leave the Trump administration without having, a tweet slammer on the way out.
But she also handled, again, I'll go back to this is how women handle these, you have to somewhat take on the attack, but somewhat sort of just dismiss it, right? So she didn't really engage it because it's a way to belittle him that, I'm not even going to talk about that. Let me just tell you about me. It was a smart response, actually.
Everyone stand by. What does Iowa historically tell us about the overall race for the White House? We're going to look at that. We'll discuss with presidential historian next.
Iowa Republicans have a questionable track record when it comes to picking future presidential nominees. In 3 of the past 4 elections, the candidate who won the Iowa caucuses did not go on to win the Republican nomination. Donald Trump won both in 2020, but in 2016, of course, remember, Iowan Republicans picked Ted Cruz. In 2012, it was Rick Santorum. 2008, Mike Huckabee. None of those 3 candidates went on to win the GOP nomination. CNN presidential historian Tim Naftali joins me now. And Tim, so glad to have you on this day. Given the history of the Iowa caucuses and what we're looking at tonight, how much stock are you putting in tonight's results?
Well, Caitlin, James Baker, who was George Herbert Walker Bush's campaign manager, said that politics is beating expectations. And even though Iowa has not had a great track record in kingmaking, it still can change our set of expectations about what's going to happen in New Hampshire. And that's really what people are looking at today. That's why people care about the margin of Trump's victory. That's why the people care about who comes second. I just put this out there. The Des Moines Register poll in 2016 overestimated Trump's vote and underestimated Cruz's vote. Now, all pollsters have changed the way in which they approach polling since 2016, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that the Des Moines Register poll putting Trump at 48% has actually exaggerated the amount of support he's going to get tonight.
But
so it's all about expectations.
Yeah, and even if it is exaggerated, he is still far and away above any of the other candidates. We talk about this race for second place, but I wonder if you think this is a primary that people are paying such close attention to when it does seem that Donald Trump is as far ahead. We'll see what the voters decide tonight, of course, or if this is really a primary that could be more dictated by his criminal cases and the trials that he's facing.
Well, what's always been interesting about Iowa is the argument that Iowa voters made, and it goes right back to when the Iowa caucus got put on the political map by Jimmy Carter. Iowa said, we need to get to know you. We're not part of a national campaign. We want to meet you. And for the longest time, Iowans rewarded candidates that came in and went to as many of the 99 counties as they could. Donald Trump's campaign this time around is very peculiar because he's basically flipping on its head and turning Iowa into a national campaign, wasn't there physically very often, and counting on the fact that he's the first former president to run in a primary, to allow him to break the rules of the Iowa caucus. And tonight we'll see if he's going to get away with it. And the rules of the Iowa caucus used to be, we need you to be here if you expect us to be there for you on caucus night.
He has spent less time in Iowa than Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, or Vivek Ramaswamy when you look at events. And I know I can hear a Trump spokesperson calling me now saying, well, he has bigger events, so he doesn't have to go to as many of them as their argument. But if he does win tonight, I mean, does it mean that the end of the kind of retail campaigning that Iowa is known for is over, that this has become nationalized, like you said?
Well, our country goes through these cycles, and our political culture changes. And right now, we're at a moment where everything seems nationalized. So, yes, that would mean it's true. But that doesn't mean it's going to last forever. Yes, it would mean that Iowa, like most every other state in the union, is caught in a national campaign, and retail politics doesn't matter as much. But I wouldn't predict that to be true, for example, 10 or 15 years from now. But certainly it's true, would be true tonight.
We'll be watching closely. Tim Naftali, thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin.
So how does a caucus actually work? It feels like something you remember every 4 years, and then you forget it. Why are they first? Why is it significant? We're going to take a closer look to prepare you for what to expect tonight in just a moment.
As we wait for Iowans to gather for their First in the Nation caucuses tonight, many of you may wonder how this process works. CNET John Berman joins us at the Magic Wall to walk us through what will unfold this evening. John?
So, Anderson, this is what the Iowa voting looks like right now. All gray because no votes have been cast, and they won't be cast until Iowans show up at caucus sites tonight at 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. By the way, our leaderboard, because there are no votes cast, is alphabetical, which is why Asa Hutchinson is still here. This might be the best moment of the entire campaign for Asa Hutchinson, but it is alphabetical. Donald Trump is down there. So, 7 o'clock Central Time tonight, Iowans show up at their caucus sites. Number one, when they get there, a representative from each campaign gives a short speech. That is either a campaign official or someone from the local community who tries to convince their friends to vote for the candidate of their choice. After that, step number two, the voting. the caucus goers, they write their choice. Often it's just you write it on a piece of paper and you hand it in. This is a simple process. Remember, there's more than 1,000 caucus sites. Some of them are quite small, and it's quite homey. Step number 3 is the counting of the votes. The ballots are counted, recorded, then they are sent to the state party organization where they're tabulated. During this step here, CNN's got some of the best reporters in the country at some of these caucus sites. We may get a sense of some of the counting before they even submit the ballots, but this is how we find out how each candidate's doing. Now, I should note, what we get tonight is a vote count of all the ballots that are cast, but this is really just the first step in the delegate selection process. Iowa has 40 delegates that they're going to send to the Republican National Convention. This is choosing the precinct level delegates to go. I think it's to the district convention, then they go to the county convention, Anderson, then they go to the state convention. So it's a long process to select these 40 delegates to go to the Republican National Convention. But what it really is for us tonight is to get a gauge of support for each candidate.
All right, John Berman. John, thanks very much. Just over 5 hours to go. Candidates are making their closing arguments. The caucuses will give us the first real look at who has the edge in the race for the Republican presidential nomination. We're going to take a look at what is at stake and what each candidate needs after a quick break. And welcome. I'm Anderson Cooper in New York alongside Caitlin Collins in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our live coverage of the Iowa Republican caucuses, the first nominating contest in the 2024 race. The first in the nation contest is shaping up to be a memorable one. Donald Trump, the frontrunner, is urging his supporters not to be complacent. Nikki Haley is making the electability case, arguing she's best suited to take on President Biden. Governor Ron DeSantis says he's the only one who can compete with Trump for the Republican base. Stakes are extremely high, the temperature is extremely low, and the entire nation is watching to see what tonight's results will mean for an already intense election year. Let's get you to the ground with CNN's Elena Treen in Des Moines. So, Elena, what are you hearing there in the home stretch?
Right. Well, after months of crisscrossing the state of Iowa and pouring tens of millions of dollars into campaign ads, the candidates really spent the final days before tonight's Iowa caucuses delivering their closing arguments to Iowa voters and urging them to brave the frigid weather here in the state and turn out and caucus for them. Now, Donald Trump has remained the clear frontrunner. He has maintained his commanding lead in the polls. But a big question is still whether or not his path to the potential Republican nomination will become more difficult after Iowa. We're also paying close attention to whether Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis will emerge as the number 2 and see where they fare tonight. A lot of people are trying to see which one of them will become the clear alternative to Donald Trump. And that is something that Nikki Haley actually addressed recently with our colleague Kylie Atwood. Take a listen to what she said.
How do you make this into the two-person race between you and former President Trump if you don't come in second? If Governor DeSantis comes in second and he's still in the race going into New Hampshire?
We don't play in ifs. Look, I remember when there were 14 candidates in the race and I was 2% in the polls and everybody was saying how. I am showing you how. We're going to continue to show you how. Let's look and see what the caucus numbers are tonight, and then let's head to New Hampshire because that's what our plan is.
Now, Anderson and Caitlin, according to my conversations with Donald Trump's campaign, they are anticipating that he will win tonight, just like the polls are saying. But a big question is by how much of a lead that could be. They really want him to win by a big enough margin that will carry him through the rest of primary season and blunt the momentum that any of his challengers may see, particularly Nikki Haley, who they're watching very closely as she rises in the polls in New Hampshire, which, of course, their primary is next week. Anderson, Caitlin.
Elena Treen, thanks very much. Appreciate it. In Iowa, it's not just about where you finish, of course. It's about how you finish, the margins, whether you beat expectations or come up short. All of that can determine whether your candidacy fights another day after Iowa. Let's go to John Berman at the Magic Wall. So give us a sense of the thresholds the candidates are aiming to hit.
Yeah, Anderson, it's really interesting. For Donald Trump, as Elena was saying, he doesn't just want to win, he wants to make history. What would history be? Well, George W. Bush reached the highest number in a Republican caucus. He got 41% of the vote. Donald Trump, in theory, wants to get higher to that, maybe even get up over 50% of the vote. For Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley in the battle for second place, it's all about beating expectations. And for Ron DeSantis, that means showing that some of these polls that show him slipping into third place are wrong and that he can regain the momentum. So what does that mean? Ron DeSantis, first of all, benefits from the fact that 62% of his voters say that they will definitely show up. But Ron DeSantis is also hoping that the recent polls were wrong, like they were in 2016. The final Des Moines Register poll before 2016 showed Donald Trump at 28%, Ted Cruz at 23%. What ultimately happened? Ted Cruz won with almost 28%. Donald Trump was in second. So Ron DeSantis is hoping to show that his organization can get him over that hump. Maybe not into first place, but a strong second place. Now, for Nikki Haley, this is about campaigning in a way for a more general election type campaign. She is trying to appeal to a wider group of voters, not just Republicans, but also Democrats and independents. The Des Moines Register poll finds that about 70% of people who show up tonight will be Republicans, but almost 28% will be Democrats or independent who can vote if they change their party tonight. So she wants to appeal to these people. Where are these people? Well, let's look at the presidential election in 2020. We can see these blue counties are where Joe Biden won. Obviously, there are Democrats and independents there. They also happen to be where there are a lot of people. The bigger the circle, the greater the population. Nikki Haley is hoping to pick up votes in these population centers. And really, for both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, this is a little bit like Groundhog Day, Anderson. It's not like the repetition that we've come to think of Groundhog Day, but if the groundhog sees its shadow, you get 6 more weeks of winter. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis want to be close enough so this campaign lasts another 6 weeks.
John Berman, John, thanks. Caitlin?
And Anderson, my next guest is a popular conservative radio host, Jeff Angelo, a former Iowa State senator, and many of the Republican candidates have repeatedly been on his show, Need to Know with Jeff Angelo. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. What are you hearing about how today is shaping up with the weather, what this could look like?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, Caitlin, probably hardcore Republicans, hardcore Trump supporters showing up. I think that will give Trump the win. I do think that DeSantis is feeling very good about his turnout operation in Iowa and that he can get that strong second place finish. But I don't think we're going to see a record crowd tonight. Looks like 30 below zero wind chills as the caucuses get underway. And a lot of folks who are hearing the buzz about the Iowa caucus or thinking maybe about going to caucus for a candidate, they stay home and they make chili and cinnamon rolls tonight.
Whose supporters do you think, that sounds really good, but whose supporters do you think could be the most affected by that? Which candidate here? Because you do have these competing arguments from the Trump team saying, his supporters are so devoted they'd crawl over glass for him. But you have DeSantis saying that he's got people they've got this really good turnout machine that they've been working on for months. Nikki Haley's team arguing, she has appeal in urban areas. It may be easier for them to get to their caucus places. What's your sense of who shakes out the best here?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the Trump supporters will walk through glass or a blizzard to get to the caucus. Obviously, Trump feels like they're willing to risk death to show up tonight. So I think he does finish strong. I do think the DeSantis operation has a strong turnout operation. I do think that he finishes second and will live to fight another day. I think Haley's turnout operation isn't nearly as impressive. I don't think her supporters are nearly as passionate. I think it costs her tonight. And I actually do think when she's doing a CNN interview after the caucus is over, she'll blame the weather and say, well, on to New Hampshire.
When you look at what Trump has been saying in the past, even today, I think he posted in one saying that he was up 57 points over Nikki Haley or over his competitors in this race. What margin do you expect Trump to have in this race if the polls are accurate, if the numbers are the way that they're looking right now? Would you be surprised if he finished under 50% today?
No, I absolutely wouldn't. I think he'll win by 25. I think he will finish under 50. And then if DeSantis can finish in second place, he'll point out that over 50% of Iowa caucus goers didn't vote for Trump. That means if everyone will coalesce behind the right candidate, then the folks who don't want Trump to be the nominee would be successful in pushing him out as the nominee. And he'll argue it's him, Ron DeSantis. He's the guy that everyone needs to coalesce around. So it is a momentum game. It is an expectations game. And if he can get momentum and beat expectations tonight, I do think he goes into New Hampshire saying, I'm the legitimate alternative candidate to Donald Trump, not Nikki Haley.
I think if Trump wins tonight, he'll have done something that you don't often see someone who wins the Republican caucuses in Iowa do, which is not come to the state very much, didn't do the full 99 counties. Not only did he not get the governor's endorsement, he's been attacking Kim Reynolds just yesterday in a pretty visceral remarks that he made in his speech. What do you make of that if Iowans still reward him, if he still wins, even though he hasn't spent a lot of time in the state and has attacked the governor?
Caitlin, I think Donald Trump's a political unicorn, the likes of which we'll never see again. I think he defies all the rules. He's been defying all the rules. Remember that it was in Iowa that he said, well, I like my war heroes not captured, referring to John McCain. That would have sunk anybody else. So he gets to defy all the rules we understand in regard to how politics operates. I think he is a political unicorn. I think after this campaign is over, I think we really go back to more of the normal politics we've come to expect, including retail campaigning in Iowa. But he's given a pass to defy all the political rules because he's still seen as an outsider by the people who support him. Even though he's been president, he successfully tends that outsider image, and they give him a pass on all the normal political rules that apply to a Ron DeSantis or a Nikki Haley.
Jeff Angelo, we'll be watching closely tonight. I know you will, too. Thank you for your time.
You bet, Caitlin. Thank you.
And this will be the coldest Iowa caucuses on record. What are the candidates doing about it? What are they saying about it? We'll tell you next.
Iowa Republicans are going to face brutal cold when they convene to caucus in just a few hours. Tonight, temperatures are expected to drop below zero across the state. Some places could hit 13 below. If you factor in the wind chill, it could feel like minus 35. There are concerns that the frigid weather could impact turnout, but the candidates are hoping voters will not be deterred.
If you're sick as a dog, you say, darling, I got to make it. Even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it, remember?
The 186,000 people in 2016, it's probably going to be less than that. And it may even be significantly less than that. So if you go out and you bring some family members and you bring some neighbors, that's going to make a huge, huge difference for us. And so we're asking people to do it.
Even though it is freezing outside, literally, we haven't seen anyone that's deterred from showing up at the caucuses.
My team is back with me here in New York. Karen, first to you. What kind of impact is this going to have?
I think it's going to make people question how badly they really want to go out tonight, right? And particularly in those venues where we've heard earlier things about shuttling people from parking to their venues, and for those venues that may have longer lines because you have to check in, you get your form, you listen to some speeches, then you do your vote. So for people who may see a big line, maybe they'll say, I'm not so sure. And particularly for Nikki Haley, who, as we saw in that Des Moines Register poll, a big portion of her support are Democrats who say they want to re-register as Republicans and caucus tonight, and independents. And again, in a cold weather like this, they're going to probably say, is that really what I want to do tonight? Again, this is part of why I think it really favors Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Also because their canvassers were volunteers. She had paid canvassers. And the difference is when somebody knocks on your door with that passion and they want to evangelize you about their candidate, it's a very different feeling than when someone who's been paid to just, here's the talking points, says, can you please come?
Doug, you know Iowa well. I mean, do you think it hurts Nikki Haley the most?
I think we don't know who it hurts because there are so many variables here. If you look at where Donald Trump's support is the strongest, it's those really rural areas where you have far to go on icy roads. And I would say it's not the cold that matters. It's the wind and it's the ice that's on the road. Iowa is used to cold. Casey Hunt did an interview this morning from Mars Coffee House, which is a small chain in Des Moines. She was dressed for the South Pole. The person she was interviewing was wearing a light jacket. We've seen people go to these events, whether it's for Trump or DeSantis or whomever, and some of them are wearing shorts. They're dressed like John Fetterman. So cold does not bother these people. But if it's windy, if it's difficult to get to their place, it could affect Donald Trump. And for the reasons that Karen laid out, it could affect Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. It makes some of the calculus on this really difficult.
Yeah. It's just hard to tell, to your point also. I mean, Trump's voters tend to be, most enthusiastic in rural areas, but also compared to the enthusiasm level of other voters, they are more enthusiastic. How does that pale against the more urban dwelling Nikki Haley voters who, frankly, they don't have to go out to their car that far, to drive that far to get to the place. So, the most exciting part about right now is that it's about to start. The game's about to begin, and it's not a game. No. It is a contest for our democracy, and we've been talking about it and waiting for it and speculating about it for 4 years, and it's now.
There will be actual votes.
This time tomorrow, we will know what's happening. Somebody will be up, somebody will be down, somebody may be out.
And we'll have some details. I mean, look, democracy, decisions are made by people who show up. And people who live in Iowa have I think, a privilege and a responsibility to show up. Because the trajectory implications for this nomination and for the entire election will be set by this race. If this is closer than expected, we could have a real race on our hands. If Donald Trump puts this away, that could be considered a fait accompli, despite the fact that you're going to have, 180,000 people out of a state of 3.1 million vote? That's not a representative election. So we need people to show up and take the responsibility seriously, because to a large extent, they're setting the table for all of us in the United States.
If Haley beats DeSantis for second place, what does that mean for her campaign heading into New Hampshire?
Gives her momentum, and we've seen that she is doing quite well in New Hampshire. So it gives her a lot of momentum going into New Hampshire, which also could influence South Carolina, where she's behind Donald Trump. If she, again, she's making this electability argument. So if that starts to really resonate with people and they see that, well, actually, maybe there is an electorate for her, that could change some people's minds.
And Iowa is often, Anderson, not about who wins it. We always focus on the winner. It's who emerges. Yeah. If Nikki Haley comes in second place, and this is where the weather gets interesting on this, it means Ron DeSantis' campaign is over. He doesn't go to New Hampshire or South Carolina. He goes back to Florida.
You think he would? I mean, he has said he would go on to South Carolina.
Everybody's in until they're out. That's always the case. Chris Christie was not leaving this campaign until the moment he did.
Yeah, Doug High, thanks. Karen Finney as well. Margaret Hoover, John Avalon, thank you. Inflation, border security, foreign policy. We're going to take a look at what the main issues driving Iowans are. We're going to go live on the ground. CNN's live special coverage continues next.
This just in, as we are hearing from the Iowa Republican Party, which says there have been no systematic issues with caucus locations or precincts ahead of tonight's Iowa caucuses. Despite the weather, says the show is still on as planned. CNN's Eva McKend is in Des Moines covering all of this live. Eva, let's talk about what you've been hearing from voters as you've been on the ground in there the last several days. What they say is driving them to come out despite that weather tonight. What have they been telling you?
Well, Caitlin, I've actually been back and forth the last several weeks, and I can tell you a number of issues are driving them. Sometimes I'm really struck by how thoughtful the questions to the candidates are. Some ask about returning civility to our politics. Others ask about foreign policy, immigration. And as we speak, Caitlin, the candidates are on the campaign trail right now, still in conversation with these voters, trying to make up some time that they lost during those 2 snowstorms last week. Take a listen to what they're telling them.
You're never going to have an opportunity to have your voice pack more of a punch than it is tonight.
Remember, today is the day we make history. Today is the day we make history because we tune out the noise of the media, we tune out the noise of the politicians, and we raise the voices of Americans that say, We want a better day. We're going to make it happen. Thank you. God bless you. Let's do this.
And I just got off the phone with a prominent faith leader, John Palmer. He's a retired Iowa pastor, and he has prayed for Governor DeSantis during a number of events, town halls, our debate last week. And he actually told me that he is switching his support from Governor DeSantis to Nikki Haley. So that just gives you a sense that Nikki Haley, Governor DeSantis, they're really competing for the same voters here in Iowa as they are locked in this battle for second place, Caitlin.
Eva McKend in Des Moines, thank you. I want to bring back my panel with me now. And Matt Mowers, when you're looking at this and you're hearing what Governor DeSantis is saying there, making this argument also more broadly to voters that if they care about policy and these issues that Eva just laid out, that they should pick him. I mean, what happens if he doesn't come in that strong second place tonight? What is the message that they're sending?
Well, this is Iowa could be a springboard for Nikki Haley. It could be a pair of cement shoes for Ron DeSantis if things don't go well for him tonight. I know he's got a lot of events scheduled, but as one of the other panelists said, you're in this race until you're not. Governor Christie's a good friend. He had a full schedule set up for after Wednesday of last week and then dropped out on Wednesday. And so Ron DeSantis is going to have to look in the mirror and really decide, does he have a path forward here? Now, one thing a lot of candidates are looking for is what happens with the Supreme Court ruling in early March. And there's going to be a motivation for a lot of these candidates to try to play this out as long as possible. Most believe the Supreme Court's going to allow Donald Trump to be on the ballot. But every politician has a little grain of hope and a seed of hope in their mind, thinking maybe there's a chance they could absorb some of his voters if somehow he weren't on the ballot. So it's unlikely, but that goes through their mind.
Maybe they'll stay in the race longer, even if they don't do very well here in New Hampshire, because they're holding out hope that maybe something could trip up Trump down the road.
Well, now, the challenge for Ron DeSantis is he's running out of money. Right? And often you don't get out of presidential politics and presidential campaigns because you're losing. It's because you're broke. And so we're going to have to see how much money he actually has on hand if he comes in third place. That's going to dictate more than anything else how long Ron DeSantis is a candidate for president.
What are you hearing?
Look, I mean, this is the thing that donors are talking about right now, that if they do not want to support and keep funding a campaign that has such a narrow path, but I would also watch DeSantis, and he needs to ask himself, how lean is he willing to make his operation if he doesn't have a good night tonight? Because it's not unheard of for stubborn politicians to continue a presidential campaign if they can, and just cut it up as much as they can to continue. And that's a question that DeSantis is going to have to answer for himself. But again, I'm not sold on this being a bad night for Ron DeSantis yet. This is a state that he's focused on. He has a very serious ground operation there, and I'm terrible at predictions anyway. So, let's see it unfold. But again, the looming questions over this night, one of the big ones is Ron DeSantis going forward.
You did predict Michigan was going to beat Alabama, but we won't get into that. Jackie, if you're looking at Trump's mindset, as we so often do going into this, I mean, he's posting today criticizing Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy, probably most after Nikki Haley, writing today that he doesn't think she can win a general election because she doesn't have MAGA supporters behind her, that she never will. This is as close as he's probably gotten to complimenting Ron DeSantis, saying that he is MAGA light, at least. But Trump says MAGA is almost all of the Republican Party, and saying that candidates who kind of are in the vein of Nikki Haley can't win a general election. I mean, that's the primary argument being made against Donald Trump himself.
Right. He has this way of trying to turn the argument around against him on someone else. But listen, he's going after Haley because he's threatened by her, particularly somewhere like New Hampshire, because if she's able to beat him in New Hampshire, that does show that it is a possible thing and could create a permission structure down the line if some people aren't exactly enthralled. Now, these are a lot of ifs. This is a lot of, wish casting for people who don't like Donald Trump and the Republican Party. But if he keeps spending money against her, if he keeps spending money, if he keeps talking about her, that's all you need to know. He'd be completely ignoring her if he wasn't threatened.
She's right. I mean, listen, Don Mattingly told Derek Jeter this one time, run it out because you never know who's watching. And right now, what you guys were talking about before in terms of donors watching this, they're closely watching this to see where DeSantis finishes. You're talking about leaning the operation. I don't even know if that's feasible in terms of what he did in Iowa. He hasn't really focused on New Hampshire. I know he's going tomorrow for a town hall. He's kind of shifted his focus to South Carolina, where he feels like he could win that state. Tonight is a pivotal night. We're going to wake up tomorrow morning, and either Ron DeSantis is still going to be in this race, We're going to get a surprise, or we're going to get chalk, like we say in sports.
We've talked a lot about the margins here and what Trump is aiming for, and he certainly would like to just kind of put this race to bed tonight. He is going after Vivek Ramaswamy, which I think is notable because he did get about 8%, I believe, in that Des Moines Register poll that came out on Saturday night. Is there a concern that he could cut into the margins for the former president?
I think it's a concern not just for Iowa, but also for New Hampshire, where Donald Trump really may need those votes. Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis are usually juxtaposing between, 6 and 5% in New Hampshire. Every vote may matter there. So I think it has as much to do with New Hampshire as it does with Iowa and what Donald Trump's saying about Vivek Ramaswamy on that. Look, I've talked to folks in the Trump campaign, and for months they've been talking about we want to win by at least 12. And so I know they're re-lowering expectations again today. Internally, their campaign team recognizes that the largest spread in history was actually Bob Dole in 1988 when he won by about 13 points. They figure if they can do that, they can claim history. But the challenge, of course, is this. He's not just running as an open primary field. He's running as a quasi-incumbent. And so they're going to have a lot of answering to do if he doesn't hit 50%. But regardless, the spread is what it is. He's clearly the front runner going into not just tonight in Iowa, but likely even New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If this thing goes on for a while and goes on to South Carolina, that is going to be the primary to watch, I think, because it is Nikki Haley's home state, because Ron DeSantis is flying there after Iowa, because Donald Trump is so popular there. Look, I mean, and because it's such a conservative state, I think that will be what's important to watch after this, if all of these candidates, or most of them, stay in this race.
But it's a lot of oxygen between New Hampshire and South Carolina this year. It's something like 30 some days between the two. That's a lot. It's a lot of a lot of money, a lot of time, and if that's where they're, I mean, if you're Ron DeSantis, you need money to enable to continue your campaign down there if that's where you're going to focus.
Well, it's beautiful because you can see that all of them have positioned each other in a different state. So Ron DeSantis is focused on Iowa, Nikki Haley's focused on New Hampshire. Donald Trump is not even looking at them. He's looking past them, to quote Jay-Z. Like, he's not even looking at these candidates. So he's focused on just hammering them tonight, winning New Hampshire. By January 25th, let's all rally behind me. If one of them wins tonight, or in New Hampshire next week with Nikki Haley, it's going to be interesting to watch. All eyes turn to South Carolina, that's for sure.
Safe to say. That's like 3 quotes that you dropped.
I know.
I'm
I got
really
like 5
impressed
more
by
if you
that.
let me.
That was really good. We need the rest of the panel to drop some quotes. Thank you all. Right now, Republican presidential candidates are making those final appeals to voters in Iowa ahead of the caucuses. What can we expect from young voters, young Republicans? That and much more in our special coverage right after this.
The Iowa caucuses start in less than 5 hours, and some voters are juggling them with classwork. Young Republicans may have a larger than expected say tonight because the deep freeze could keep some of the older ones home. Joining me now from West Des Moines is Dylan Engelbrecht. He's the chair of the Iowa Federation of College Republicans and the Drake College Republicans. This is his second time voting in the Iowa caucuses. Dylan, thanks for being with us. So for young voters, what's more important tonight, electability or the issues?
Well, when it comes down to it, I think electability, we want to be unified for a candidate against President Joe Biden. But a lot of conversation around the issues as well, mainly affordability for housing, making sure they have access to great jobs after graduation. And a lot of the cultural issues like the efforts of DEI and all that, a lot of those issues are being talked about and seen on college campuses. So definitely top of mind for young Republicans here in the state.
What about turnout tonight in terms of actually going out and caucusing?
Well, I think we're really energized here at the college level. Students are just coming back from winter break, getting settled into their dorms, maybe shoveling out their car from the last couple days of the blizzard. But today we've seen the plows out and getting the snow removed. So I think we're expecting some really great turnout tonight, especially on the college campuses. We've had candidates from around the cycle coming to different college campuses, speaking with voters, and really trying to court that key demographic that the Republican Party's been trying to court this past election. So I know here in Des Moines and at Drake University, we've had students volunteering and working on campaigns and just simply going to caucus events throughout this whole time, whether that's at a local diner or the big rallies like we see with President Trump. So definitely a lot of energy here on the ground despite the weather. And today I think we're at -1 degree and it feels like summer compared to the last couple days.
Do you think most young Republicans know which candidates they're going to caucus for or vote for, or more still undecided?
I think a lot of them have joined the camps. Like I said, we've had a lot of people volunteering, whether that be through phone banking, going to rallies and showing their support, getting pictures with candidates. I think a lot of people have settled on their candidate. You still have that really firm base for President Trump. That he played a key part of turning Iowa red in 2016 and doubling down with him in 2020, with a lot of those 33 pivot counties that voted for Obama twice and then doubled down on Trump again. In 2016 and 2020. But I think we also have a lot of students that are saying, hey, maybe there's an alternative like Ambassador Nikki Haley or Governor DeSantis or Vivek Ramaswamy. So definitely a key demographic that I'm going to be watching tonight. Those big college campuses like in Ames with Iowa State, University of Iowa in Iowa City, and up in Cedar Falls, the University of Northern Iowa.
And is getting to the caucus sites an issue? I mean, are they near are the sites near or on college campuses?
Yeah, a lot of them are a short drive away, less than a 5-minute drive away, and I know some of them at University of Iowa are just a quick walk down the street. So, definitely we're encouraging students to make their plan to go to caucus and make sure you have plenty of time to get there. Like we've covered here on CNN, the caucuses start at 7 o'clock, but try and get there around 6:30. Make sure you have plenty of time with the roads and the walkways to make sure you get there safely and get inside to where it's warm. So definitely close to campuses, and like I said, it's going to be a huge turnout tonight for young conservatives across the state.
Do you think one candidate has been better at reaching out to young voters than others?
I think it's been a pretty mixed bag. I think, a candidate like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's an outsider, who's been, really active on social media and trying to court that younger vote, has been a huge candidate this cycle. But I think continuing, President Trump and Governor DeSantis have had a huge ground game here in the state of Iowa. So, whether that's knocking doors or, the mailers, the text, or the huge events that they're inviting students to, that's played a big role. But I think Ambassador Haley has had a lot, has been going to a lot of campuses and really appealing to a lot more of those moderate students that maybe stayed home in 2020 or voted Democrat in 2020, but are, maybe thinking that, hey, I want to come back to the Republican Party if it was a person like Ambassador Haley. So, like I said, definitely a mixed bag, just like what we see in the polls, but I think definitely a couple of those key candidates were making huge strides within the young vote here in the state.
Well, good luck to you tonight. I hope you get there and hope it's not too cold. Dylan Engelbrecht, thanks so much.
Thank you, Anderson.
As Iowan Republicans get ready to caucus and vote for a nominee, Democrats are keeping a close eye on the contest. What are they watching for? We'll talk about that next.
The Biden campaign is closely watching the Iowa caucuses today alongside the rest of us. The communications director telling CNN that they are gearing up to make the November election a fight about, quote, more freedom and more democracy in the United States. CNN's MJ Lee is live at the White House. MJ, obviously we've got this. We have the Biden campaign announcing that big fundraising haul earlier today. What are they looking for in tonight's caucuses?
Yeah, even if President Biden isn't on any ballots tonight, the Biden campaign is very much closely watching what happens in Iowa tonight to try to glean anything they can about the beginning of this process on the Republican side. That will, of course, ultimately determine who President Biden goes up against in November. And as with so many people that are paying attention to this election, the widespread view within the Biden campaign and many of Biden's allies at this moment in time is certainly that the expectation is that President Biden will be going up against Donald Trump come November. But we are seeing an interesting thing happen here where there is, of course, sort of the possibility that if something goes awry or something goes unexpected in this race on the other side of the aisle, of course, there's always the possibility that somebody else ends up having a moment or ends up emerging the nominee. And interestingly, I was just listening to the Biden campaign holding a press conference in Iowa, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was casting the field as a field of Trump mini-me's. I thought that moment was kind of interesting because they're sort of acknowledging, yes, it's Trump that we are making preparations to run up against, but all of the other candidates that are running against him and trying to defeat him, they espouse similar ideas as Donald Trump, the former president. So I do think that is an idea that we are going to hear more from the campaign. And as this presser was going on, they were also leaning very heavily into rights for abortion rights and reproductive rights. That, of course, as you know very well, is expected to be a very big theme heading into the fall, something that has worked very well for them, the Biden campaign thinks.
Yeah, we'll see if it continues to do so. MJ Lee, thank you. And joining me now is Howard Dean, former Democratic National Committee chair, also former Vermont governor, and also the former presidential candidate who ran in this race not too long ago, knows what it's like to be a presidential candidate in Iowa. Governor Dean, given that, I mean, what are you looking at tonight? What are you looking for in these caucuses tonight, and what stands out?
I'm looking at two things. One is turnout. This is the coldest caucus they've ever had. And it's going to be actually hazardous for people to come to the polls, especially older people in rural areas, which is Trump's strong suit. The second is I'm looking to see if Nikki Haley can beat DeSantis, because if she does, she's going to beat him in New Hampshire, and that's probably the end of the DeSantis campaign. And then the third thing, of course, I'm looking at is what are the margins? Does Trump get to 50 or not? Because if he doesn't, he's got some trouble on his hands.
And you know what a race like this could do as far as momentum. I mean, if there is a strong second finish for Nikki Haley, if she goes on to New Hampshire, as you predicted, potentially to win New Hampshire, I mean, what does the future of this race look like?
Well, if she wins New Hampshire, this is a completely different race. Trump can't afford to lose any primaries this early, coming in with a supposed 50% majority. So that's a whole different ballgame. I wouldn't predict that right now, but I do think it's a possibility.
But given that and what we're looking at tonight with this weather, and you know how challenging weather like this can be for those voters to get out, when you look at the polls and it says who's more enthusiastic compared to DeSantis' supporters, Trump supporters, and Nikki Haley supporters, hers are certainly near the bottom. Could that affect what we see play out in just a few hours?
I don't think so. You know, the vote for Haley is a vote for the survival of the Republican Party and actually the survival of the country. I think most of the Nikki Haley supporters understand that Trump is borderline crazy, and I think they're horrified by what's happened to the Republican Party. So the question is who's motivated to come out and who isn't. And I think there are a lot of Republicans who do really want change. And Trump is not the answer to change. That's more chaos, incompetence, and dishonesty.
Is Nikki Haley, if she's the Republican nominee, is she a bigger threat to President Biden?
Yeah, she is a threat to President Biden. I think we have a better chance of beating Trump than we do of Nikki Haley.
Howard Dean, as always, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know we had a few technical issues. We appreciate you joining, though.
Thanks for your patience.
And thanks to all of you for watching. CNN's special live coverage of the Iowa caucuses continues right after a quick break. The headlines out of Iowa: it is caucus day and it is cold. The question is, how do the two work together? And how does one affect the other? CNN's John Berman is at the Magic Wall. John, I mean, I don't know if anyone's noticed yet, but it is quite chilly in Iowa today. And I think it is a real question of if it has a real impact on tonight.
It will make everyone very cold, Caitlin. 99 counties in Iowa. How many of them under winter weather warnings? 99. All 99 in yellow there. The deep yellow have wind chill warnings. The pale yellow, weather advisories. It's just going to be so cold there. Let me blow this up so you can see it. It's worth it. It's worth it. Des Moines, 8 o'clock tonight, 7 below. That's without the wind. Forget the wind chill. 7 below. Davenport, 7 below. Sheldon up here in the northern corner, 9 below. That is so, so cold. And one other thing I want to point out, some of these counties, Caitlin, only have one caucus site. So if you look at, for instance, Palo Alto County or Emmett County. Not a lot of population there, but people are going to need to travel in this ice cold weather to get what they're going, because this entire county, these counties only have one site. Some of the cities like Des Moines have a lot more, have many more locations. People won't have to travel as far, but you can see how this could have an impact.
Yeah, and as I'm with Chad Myers, I'm worried about the livestock here.
Livestock does not get to vote, not even in Iowa, Caitlin.
John Berman, as always, thank you so much for that. Thank you all so much for joining us. Our special coverage of all of this is going to continue, including the weather, with Wolf Blitzer and Aaron Burnett right now.